Welcome, everyone, to Conversations on the Wild Path. I'm Aaron, and today I'm joined by the lovely Gemma Popejoy, who is a former Chief People Officer who left a successful corporate career, spent a year adventuring, and is now retraining as a mountain leader while running her own people consultancy. And today we're going to talk about what it really takes to make that bold career change, belonging in the outdoors, and what the outdoor industry could really do differently to open its doors just a little bit wider. Gemma, really glad to have you here today.
Wonderful to be here, especially as it's such a sunny morning. It's wonderful. Makes a real
Absolutely.
difference, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Spring is finally arrived, which is really nice. Um, and Gemma, I think to kick off, I suppose it'd be lovely to hear a little bit about your story. Actually, you've had this wonderfully interesting corporate career that I think be the envy of many. And then you took a big change, a really bold change, and it'd be lovely to hear sort of how you ended up where you've ended up.
Okay, wonderful. What a question. I think my story is probably quite similar to maybe a lot of millennials, or maybe how a lot of people might be feeling right now. Um, Hopefully it resonates. But I think I did what most of us think we want to do, or need to do, or should do, sort of when we make our career choices and we go out into the wide world. And I sort of spent most of my life climbing the career corporate ladder, as it were, rather than mountains as soon as I could. And that was kind of my entire focus. And it was probably something that I did at the expense of everything else in my life, to be honest with you, for a really, really long time. And I did it in a very me way, which is all in. That's the way I tend to do things. And I did progress sort of beyond my wildest dreams at the time to the dizzy heights of a C-suite role in a global enterprise as chief people officer, doing like big, hard stuff. And I think on reflection, when we slow down and think about that, and when I think about it, it probably made me quite hard, to be honest with you, and hard on myself mostly, most of all. And I think somewhere along the way, I sort of realised that I got a bit lost. I'd sort of fallen out of love with what I was doing. I was probably quite lonely, although surrounded by people. And I probably spent much of my time, maybe as a sort of highly anxious, high performing person, trying to be perfect, listening, trying to do everything right, and sort of lost my own voice somewhere along the way of that. And I felt really stuck, to be honest. And I just carried on like that for years, really, because we all know change is really scary, isn't it? And when you've worked so hard for such a long time, actually, to make a change felt quite reckless,
Yeah.
um, particularly when you've sort of sacrificed everything for that career and that role in that way. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do other than do that. I didn't really know who I was or what I enjoyed outside of working, to be honest with you, which was pretty miserable. Go on.
And I suppose on that, obviously this was been a journey that you would have been on, right? From
Yeah.
from oh, I've hit this aspirational goal in terms of my career. But what did you think, or what was the journey in your mind of actually this isn't enough for me, and actually I would like something a little bit more, I suppose, meaningful, or maybe more aligned to who you are as a as a core human.
I think I just got bored of the sound of my own voice. I got bored of my own misery. So a few things really, right? Like I think over the last few years, we've all reevaluated what's important
Yeah.
to us. Um, my dad had an accident that left him paralysed. My dad was a great outdoors man, still is, but he had a cycling accident that left him paralysed. And I mean, I think we all sort of question our own mortality. Like that really happened to our family in the most unexpected way, and sort of seeing that really makes you evaluate. Every day you're sitting at a desk, every day you're being a bit miserable, every day you're not being present with those around you. And I think that started something in me of there's got to be more to this. um, and am I doing the work that I want to do, and am I being purposeful with my time, and am I being present with the people around me? I'm not sure I was. And I think what then you immediately go into is kind of worrying about, like, well, what happens next? So can I make the change? What does that change look like? will I ever work again? If I leave this great job, what happens next? If I retrain as something else, what else am I going to retrain as? What about this career break on my CV? Like, will people judge that and I'll never work again? Like, all of those things sort of slam into your head that prevent you doing things and making a change, I think.
And then, and I suppose in the face of that, I mean, as you say, I mean, I come from that recruitment background, and absolutely all of those points that you raise are things that, historically are looked at as, like, oh, you have a gap in your CV. I need a really good reason as to why you do that. And, it sometimes, is to the detriment, more traditional mindsets. Absolutely. That's a flag for people. But, what did it actually take for you to actually make that move? Say, okay, I'm going into the office one morning and say, okay, this is the day I hand in my resignation, and I'm, going to go off and do whatever I want to do. Was it? I mean, did you have this plan of, okay, I'm going to go. This is my next 12 months planned out of my. I'm not doing this anymore, or was it sort of a no? Actually, I'm going to go and I'll work it out once I've left.
So as much as I am the I'll think about all the risks and all the things that can go wrong. I'm a walking contradiction. So I also am like the biggest optimist. Maybe again to my detriment sometimes. But I've got a big poster here on my wall that says there's always a chance it will all go fucking excellently. And
Love that.
I think I was so miserable that I was like, I'm just gonna make the change. I'm not gonna, I couldn't even think about what might happen next. And I recognize the privilege of being able to do that, to step out. Um, Although I had worked really hard for a really long time to do that, to sort of work out. And I didn't, that's what I mean, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. What I do have and what I did have is a wonderful, not big, but small group of amazing, supportive friends and family that told me I could do everything and anything and gave me the space to sort of work out what that was and held me in all different ways whilst I did that. And I think I had always sort of gone to the outdoors to escape. So, even when I took my holiday, I was one of those kind of people, but I'd always go to escape. And then I'd always feel that familiar feeling that we all have when we come back from holiday, particularly from wild places, when we've gone to nothing, like in Canada and Yosemite, and then you come back to the desk in the office and you're kind of overstimulated again. So for me, and because I'd grown up as a scout, it always kind of represented a place of peace. So I sort of went, my mind was like, I'm just going to go and try and find some peace in those sort of places again. And I didn't really have a plan. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I didn't have a bunch of confidence either, to be honest with you. Confidence in my own fitness, confidence in, I got on a plane most weeks to go to business meetings around
Yeah.
the world, like Hong Kong and the US. But I never got on a plane on my own to do something completely on my own. I made a bunch of life changes around this time, both personally and professionally, that meant that I was sort of on my own doing this. And I was terrified. I think my little sister had to coach me to go to Gatwick Airport on one of my first trips when I decided, right, I'm going to go and have a year of adventures. I've got to get to Gatwick Airport, which is like 30 minutes down the road. My little sister, though she's not so little, had to sort of coach me to go and get there. But to go there and meet a bunch of strangers, like without all the stuff, like when you're just yourself. And what was really interesting to me on that first trip, you sort of introduce yourself, you meet at an airport, bunch of strangers doing an adventure before, and the first thing you often say is, what's your name? What do you do? Like, we really tie a lot of identity to our job title. And I started to notice that because what did I do at that stage? Well, nothing. I was very aware of that. And I started to notice that we do that on every trip, and we really do tie a lot of our identity to ourselves. And I try so hard now not to ask that question at all on any trip I go to, or any guiding that I do, because I think we kind of often get our identity confused with that, and that keeps us kind of trapped and small. And there's so much more to us than work
Absolutely.
we do.
No, 100%. And I think it's so funny you say that. I've noticed that as well over the years of, maybe also because of my background in recruitment, and my natural questions are generally, oh, what do you do? And talk to me about it, because A, I find it interesting, but also it's almost just like my job is to be inquisitive about that particular part of people's lives and careers. And I catch myself, or my girlfriend sort of, elbows me in the ribs when we're at a dinner, and I just end up interviewing the person next to me. And she's like, can we maybe not do this? This is not a work meeting. But I think, Absolutely, how we perceive ourselves, and if you have a bad day at work, that is a terrible day for you, oftentimes for many people. And actually, I don't want to say who cares, but like, to a certain degree, who cares? It's not so, it's not so important. And one of my former colleagues, actually, I've coming from that sort of executive level recruitment, very high, value to the businesses we work with, and big fees coming into the businesses that we would be operating in. But she always used to say, is like, we're not heart surgeons. Nothing here is actually that important. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And I think that's always sort of stuck with me, of like, well, actually, take a step back. The living and breathing, how important work is, it's important, certainly, but it's not it is not your sole part of your identity, that I think we all, it sort of becomes, particularly if you're coming from a really corporate, um you know natural progression from, you know school, university, job, grad program, up to, the lofty heights.
Yeah. It's sort of what we're kind of conditioned as well. Well,
Mm,
I was, right, conditioned to that's what success looks like. And we have to recognize that you have to pay the mortgage and all of that kind of stuff. But I hope that we can get to a better conversation around what fulfillment looks like. And that involves being a bit brave, though, I think, because the world of work certainly probably isn't set up so much at the moment to, I think it's getting better, but to kind of really embrace that, to embrace when someone has a career break or a travel break. And, there's so many benefits from folks stepping out for any amount of time to recharge. You come back with a whole bunch of energy, like, that's particularly needed, in the kind of corporate world that I still sort of sit within now too. Is that energy is really needed. And so I think there's a lot of judgment that goes alongside that. So, I'd encourage any leader to look beyond that and actually look for the value in that, and the story around that. I mean, I think, a lot of the time when people make a career shift, whether that's retraining or taking time out, that takes a hell of a lot of bravery and tenacity and self-backing and all the stuff that why would you not want in your business, um, in these days.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there's a far greater skill set that I think maybe we haven't been cognizant of, or haven't really, or hasn't really been acknowledged, or is starting to become acknowledged now, that actually that outdoor world and the corporate world are actually quite similar in certain ways, and there's a lot one can learn from one that go into the other. And I suppose that slightly brings me on to this other point around, the actual belonging within the outdoors,
Hmm.
right? And as we say, that there's so much crossover there. But you've come from, this really corporate world. You're now starting to guide people within the mountains, and operate much more closely with that side of things. And what have you seen when it comes to, that sense of who is there, who isn't there, who should be there, and you just don't see, on the big fun trips that you've been going on.
I think it's a really interesting question, um, and something that's really important because I think the outdoors has the potential, or we hope it's a place for everyone. It can create or be a place that everyone can do whatever they need to do in it, whether that's to go and find peace and solace, whether that's to find excitement, etc. It is so important, and it's more important, I think, than ever right now. For me, I found real belonging in the outdoors, right? So I kind of made this big jump and went on all of these trips on like the TMB, so that's Tour Mont Blanc, walking around Mont Blanc. I went to the Inca Trail, I came to Kilimanjaro, to Everest Base Camp, and all of those things I did because of the amazing folks that I met along the way. So these teams of people that were always strangers in the beginning that I often met in an airport, that I didn't know, that I quickly became part of, and we sort of quickly climbed together. And it's amazing how quickly, when everything's stripped back, how quickly you can build real connection and real friendships when you've got that shared goal together. Like, the wild makes everything really real. I think we sort of forget in our sort of corporate world very often. London is back here now. Like, it's not real, it's all truly man-made, or is often man-made. And so the wild is like what's real, and so it kind of really strips you back and hopefully really helps you be yourself. Um, like, because that's all there is really. Like, literally, when you're, doing walking somewhere wild, like Nepal or something like that, there's nothing you can. nothing apart from yourself, and you sort of really connect um, with the folks around you. So, and I really found it quite easy to belong there, but I recognise that that was probably largely because of who I am. So, and I can only talk to my own lived experience in this space, and I think we can have this conversation with our own lived experience, right? Of who we are and how we travel through the world. For me, I'm a white, able-bodied, straight woman, which means I often travel through the world probably a lot easier than other folks. Um, and I think having that kind of awareness and being really curious about that continually is something that is really important for us all to do, to understand how others experience anything, particularly the outdoors. I did an amazing training course a while ago with an organization called Fearless Futures, and they as part of that training, we explored the idea that privilege is invisible to those who have it, right? So, because of who we are, very often we have a bunch of privileges that others don't. And when you then apply that to the outdoors, and I think about who belongs and who doesn't belong, I think it's really interesting who's going on these trips, right? So, all of the stuff that I did probably comes with a price point. So, that impacts who can go on an organized trip. When we look around, we see probably a lot of people that look like you and I, because price is absolutely a barrier. I think we also think about who lives close, and we think about proximity to some of these outdoor spaces from a sort of social mobility angle to this conversation. And now that, as a guide in training, when I think about it, I think a lot about how we create spaces where everyone can genuinely feel safe and welcome, no matter where they are. And that means crossing borders and international travel, which is always an interesting element to this conversation. But things that I guess I think about is that neurodiversity, and how guiding can support those who process the world slightly differently to how others process it. And then women's experiences. So, particularly at altitude, there's very little knowledge or research about how women experience altitude at the moment, which plays a factor. And I think then that also plays into a bunch of other invisible sort of barriers too to think about that might prevent people booking a trip. So, if everyone looks a certain way, then that might prevent you from wanting to book that trip. Or particularly in the women's space, and this is something that I'm really keen that we start to talk about more, like normalizing all of the stuff that for women might make them not book a trip. So that's things like the periods, menopause, returning from maternity, and safety potentially too. So talking about all of this stuff and making it much more normal to remove as many of those barriers as we can, feels really, really important. I think
It's sorry.
um,
I just think you're so it's such a glaring point once you make it. I think having grown up going outdoors and much like you having this great privilege that the outdoors has been a very accessible place and it has been a safe place for me to go and do all sorts of crazy adventures, internationally and in the UK. And it just always brings me back to this one moment a few years ago, and I was walking the Pennine Way with a friend, and we were doing the last day of the trip, and we were sort of going back through, oh gosh, how amazing was this, this experience that we had to do over 3 years in the end. So it was like multiple years of going back to finish this journey. And we were coming into Kirk Yettam at the very end, and we were having a whole chat about this is sort of what we came onto as a topic, and we both come from quite privileged backgrounds, and we're fortunate to be able to do this without any particular challenge, I suppose. And we were saying how accessible, or talking about how accessible the outdoors was, and then we sort of came to realize that we were decked out in probably several £1,000s worth of equipment, from the watch to the bag to the shoes to the technical clothes to the sunglasses to the this and the that. And I was like, well, actually, we were walking insurance claim, really. Actually, and well, for us, I guess obviously that had been amassed over many years, and it wasn't like, oh, we went out and spent a huge amount of money in one go. It's a huge amount of money that we had been able to spend and afford to come out. And then you start to look around and go, well, actually, on this last 2 weeks of the walk, or the 2 weeks that we had been walking over the route, like, how many how many people who didn't look like us did we see? And there really weren't that many. And it was sort of like, gosh, actually, the moment you open your eyes to it, it's quite evident as to what the environment really looks like.
yeah. I think for sure, and I think being aware of that is really important. Aware of that, Yeah, you're right, completely right. Like all of the equipment, all the cost to get to these places, like prevents, truly from being accessible. And I think as well that's why there are what is great to see are organisations that really support different communities to feel welcome and feel belonging in these places. Again, we can only talk about our lived experiences, but ones that I've come across are things like outdoor adventure girls, gutsy girls, that were predominantly set up for women. But there's so many other communities that you hear about, like black girls that climb, Muslim hikers, and those organisations are so important. And I think really understanding why they exist and understanding that they are about finding community, because it's not as easy as we think of just booking a trip and showing up, or booking a walk, or just hopping in a car, all of that stuff. So everything is about breaking down those barriers and understanding the importance of those organizations, ensuring that they're in places that everyone can find, because if you're not from a background that necessarily, like, how would you find that? Which I think is sort of how we started talking, right, of actually how we make the outdoors more accessible, and how brands and leaders also make the outdoors more accessible, is such an opportunity, and is so important too. And when a lot of these brands talk about being very purpose and vision and mission led, that for me is part of what that mission should truly be.
Absolutely, and I think you'll have a fascinating view, sort of coming from the the people side of the corporate world, and from my background within sort of recruitment, and I suppose that's sort of where the wild path also came from, was this realization that yeah, the outdoor sector is broad and it's vast, and there's so many opportunities out there, and there really are so many opportunities out there. But the amount of people who have come to me and said, I had no idea that these were opportunities that were available to me, or I have no idea how these have, I would never have been able to find these roles that hit me perfectly. And I have all these experiences, but I would never have been able to find that. Or actually, I would love a role like that. I've always wanted to be an X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
but I can't, I haven't been able to find anything like that. And I think there's a huge piece, that belonging, as you say, doesn't just mean quite literally being outdoors, but we're a sector as a whole, which is every aspect from, supply chains through to corporate work, to marketing, through to, people who want to sit outside all day and go hiking and take people and do those adventures. And sort of at every point in that, there are breakdowns in what belonging, in people's accessibility and visibility, and how you feel that you belong in those spaces, that really needs to be addressed by, I suppose, a whole range of different stakeholders.
Yeah, yeah, and I think everyone can do. I think that's the point, right? It's sort of, we can do it if we're a hiker, right? We can do it when we book a trip and go on a trip and be a better teammate and be aware of other people's lived experience. We can do it when we're out as individuals, like on the mountains, and being thoughtful, literally, about sustainability and all of that good stuff. Like, we all have a bit of responsibility there. But I think thinking a little bit more about belonging, which is so important right now, and the world is so fractured and fragmented and dark, like, actually, like, our outdoor spaces can be such a place of peace, and such a place of bringing people together. But it's really thinking about who we're bringing together and how we're intentionally bringing folks together, in that way.
No, absolutely, and I think it's a long journey that I think we're all on, but it does feel like the general mood and the general sentiment is, you know, that this is actually the general trend of direction, that we need to go down this path. And I think the outdoors, what's wonderful about it as a sector, is predominantly it's a very values led,
Yeah, yeah,
environment. People really do care about this. I think what I've always noticed when I've worked with big corporates is it's a lot of, we need to say this, is often feels like the sentiment, and we say this because if we don't say this, our ESG gets, a bit downgraded, and we need to be visibly doing this. But when it comes, I mean, look at Patagonia, for instance,
mm.
right? And their pledges to the environment, and they do really sort of live that, far more than I think any other brand in the world does. And I think if we can, align not just the those of us who partake in the outdoors, but actually those big corporate organizations that we all sort of, work with, or look at or look up to, and start living that as well, it's going to really change what the entire environment actually looks like at the end of the day.
And I think my experience too of, dipping my toe into this world has been very different from my sort of corporate experience, actually. In this small community, like, since deciding I wanted to retrain as a mountain leader, Um, I can't. I'm still very shocked about the level of just generosity and support and time for anyone that I've encountered in this community. So folks that are already mountain leaders, folks that are already working as adventure guides. Like I've a bunch of amazing mentors, folks that pass opportunities my way, folks that offer their time. It has been like such a different kind of
Mm.
experience than a corporate career has. It's felt really encouraging. It's really a breath of fresh air, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I really do see it living, and I think that can happen. That you don't have to be in the Patagonias of the world. You can be a small travel company. You can be a freelance guide. Like they're just for me personally, I've just found it just so much more warm and so much more encouraging. And I think the, again, that's such an amazing platform to build off. And I think the other way then of flipping this a little bit is thinking about us as individuals. When we think about careers and jobs, again, we're always constrained by needing to pay the mortgage, pay the bills, all of that stuff. Like I don't want to sound disconnected or unrealistic, but when we look at like doing something that really is going to set our heart on fire and do something that feels really purposeful, we can also maybe start to think about it a little bit differently. Like we're conditioned to think about like 9 to 5, aren't we? And one employer and in that way. And actually what the outdoor sector can offer is if we sort of rethink what that looks like a little bit, whether that's job sharing or part-time work or working at the weekends or doing something in a volunteering space, like there's a bunch of opportunities for us to do if we kind of move our mindset a little bit. Then, and I think that's what when we started talking, when you look at the types of roles on offer, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. um like, and I guess a bit like what I'm sort of doing now, which is building my own business, based on the sort of skills that I have from the, an experience from my sort of previous corporate career that I didn't want to completely abandon because I'm good at it and it brings me joy. But I also wanted to do more of this purposeful work. So this idea of trying to build a world where you can do both of those things, and for me, that is about helping folks do hard stuff in the workplace and whether you're climbing a mountain outside of it or climbing a mountain in the workplace, bringing those worlds together. So being quite creative about, what your skills are and where you want to go. And is there a way of blending these things and also being quite patient too, that actually it doesn't happen overnight. Like it might take years of retraining. It might always be something that is just a Friday afternoon or a weekend, but the amount of like value and purposefulness you get from that and energy, you know, it is great.
So, and I think the more, and I think that the paradigm of what work is has fundamentally
Mm.
shifted from our
Yeah.
parents' generations, where you go down the very traditional route of you go to university, you get a job, you go through this, you get the white picket fence, you might stay at the same job your whole career, or you
Mm.
might make one move, but you're going to be an accountant, and you will always be an accountant. But now when you speak to people, you know well, I mean, I think certainly with the job markets being so uncertain over the last,
Yeah.
I say a long time, but quite a while of real uncertainty. It's redundancies are common. Business restructuring. You're not. I think that idea that the business values you, absolutely, and they will put you. It's not necessarily true in the way it was, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So actually, the amount of people who are like, well, actually, I do three different things, and I consult here, and I'm a mountain guide here, and actually, I'm a part-time this here, but I was also once upon a time a marketing manager for
Mm.
for business, and the as you say, your ability to do so many different things is starting to become the norm. That you don't just have one job, you have a couple of different jobs, right? But some of those pay the bills more than others, and some of them, ignite your passions and fulfill you in a way that, as you said at the beginning, sort of sitting behind a desk all day every day, and that's sort of what you do, may not for many people, particularly I guess people who are probably listening to these types of conversations. But yeah, I think it's the world is shifting fundamentally in the world of work and what that looks like, and some of those concerns that recruiters look at around, as you say, those job gaps and things are not quite so important anymore. Particularly with the new sets of leaders who are starting to come through, who are a bit more aware of this, and not the steady state. This is what we used to be. And I suppose on that thought, then, what do you think? I mean, having sat within the boardrooms, having sat, on the top of the hills, you know, What learnings do you think one can take from the other? You know, because I'm sure there are things that the outdoors as a sector can learn from, the big corporate world, and certainly there are pieces like what I just mentioned around what the boardroom could be learning from. Uh, sorry, from the outdoors can learn from them, and vice versa. It'd be lovely to hear, having sat in both of those camps, what
Mm.
you think are the obvious or the easy wins.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. And uh, my business partner, Sue's, when I go on about leadership lessons from the mountains, I'm allowed to do it because she's not here today. She always smiles at me, but there are, and it's so many parallels in that, and I think I've really lived that and sort of studied that and a bit of a geek that way, been very observant over the last couple of years. And when we look, if we just think about what's going on in our boardrooms or in our corporates or in the working world or in the world in general at the moment, it is wild and
Yeah,
hard. There is so much uncertainty, so much pressure, so much rapid change and transformation. Um, so many people feeling unsure and anxious, so much responsibility on leaders.
yeah,
And all of that together can like bring out the best and worst of us all, to be honest, in a working environment and not in a working environment. And I think we as leaders, we often just want to make it easier and make everything better for our people. Any people first leader, I think that's naturally their approach, particularly now when things get tougher and harder. But actually, what I've sort of learned and really seen up close now is that that isn't necessarily the job of leadership. Like
yeah,
when you're guiding on a mountain, you can't remove the difficulty, right? You can't really make it easier. You can't change the slope. You can't change how many steps you've got to climb. You can't really change the distance. Like ultimately, it's the individual versus the mountain, although
yeah.
you're working together as a team, right? To keep going, that choice belongs to that individual. And our role is really as a guide, and the same as leadership is to support folks to do that, to do hard things. And that's not to remove the discomfort, it's to help them grow the muscle to stay in the discomfort because the reward on offer is great for them. But from a leadership perspective, there's things that we can do differently to support folks to really do that we might have always done or we might not have realized was so important. And for me, that is 100% being really present.
Yeah.
It's about truly setting a good pace, like working out what's real and what's not real. It's about being really encouraging, but also being really honest. Honesty is kindness. It's about
Yeah.
helping people believe they can do it. And it's also about trusting people, in their sense of self, in their capabilities, and how they want to handle things when things go a little bit awry. Like giving, like, I talk about giving like agency, decisions and opportunities to make a choice. Um, and then really staying in that messy stuff, however uncomfortable it might be. And when I'm working with leaders now, like those are the things that in a face of unpredictability, when we talk about leading through uncertainty, to me, that's what really, really matters. And there's a bunch of parallels that we can draw from that.
Gosh, I love that metaphor. Actually, the whole idea of, you're right. Going up a mountain, and it's not dissimilar to working on a big project, and actually that yeah, metaphorically works really well. And the idea, you're right, you can't change a lot of the parameters in which you're working. All kind of going to the same goal, but how you get there, and having had many bosses in my time, from the real people first types who really who are there for you, and then the ones who are much more leave you alone, and you have to suffer through, but you need to get to the same end goal, and the enjoyment of both of those journeys is very different, even though the success is the same, and how I viewed those, looking back on it and going, okay, well, actually, I enjoyed that journey even though it was difficult, versus I did not enjoy this journey even though it was highly successful. um I can think about it in jobs, and I can think about it when I've gone out, with either with friends or with professional guides who are taking you
Mhm.
there, and how they've done it. And you're right, leadership is, in both ways, that there's definitely that awareness of how you lead people. And I think the outdoors has that slightly, sometimes that slightly softer style of leadership, because you can't just leave someone on a mountain and be
And
like,
I
you're too much, I'm gonna leave you alone. See you later.
but I think as well, like it has like such a again incredible skills. Like we those are our human first. They're the
Mm,
things we all need when things get messy, right? And I've seen, like I think going from a kind of corporate world and then going into the outdoors and seeing leaders in different guises in operation. One of the greatest things I observed was like the amount of patience that a leader like needs to have and what that really looks like. Patience, kindness, honesty, like also directness, like a lot of these when we go into the outdoors, things happen. We can't control the weather. We can't control. We might have to pivot. Like what irony, because that's the name of my business now. But on one of my trips when I was coming back from Everest Base Camp, like everything that could go wrong sort of went wrong, and that meant that the journey home, instead of like a short few hours plane ride, ended up being like a day's drive off the mountain, and it was incredibly scary in some ways and very stressful. And you've got 10 people all reacting to that very differently, and that leader in the middle of that needs to hold the course of keeping all those different folks calm and keeping all those people carrying on was sort of amazing to behold, to be honest with you. To me, that is real leadership in that space, and I really try to bring that into what I'm doing much more now, which is probably the antithesis of what leaders feel that they need to do at the moment, which is like there's so much going on and we need to pace and there's so many priorities. And I kind of coach around like, let's just slow down and look at what's going on and what needs to happen and be really present for your folks and your people, because that's what they need probably far more than a plan. They just need you kind of to see them and to hear them and to be really present. And I think that's my biggest lesson from the last couple of years, and something that I really coach on and I try to do myself too.
I think it's such a I think it's really then saying being bold and being trusting in your people is really what I'm hearing, that actually they are going to be okay, and you can trust them more than you think you can,
Yeah.
because there's no benefit in being the sort of the hard taskmaster who's in every detail, because actually they will get there if you are, I say kind to them is maybe a harsh phrase, but if you are taking them on that journey,
Yeah.
knowing that it is hard and understanding that, you're probably going to get more from people than if you just demand the world and lean into that.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, gosh. And I suppose it sort of is a bit of an abstract question, really, for you, Gemma. If you were, looking now at, the outdoor sector and everything that we touched on here around belonging and accessibility and leadership styles, and making that big shift from, a big corporate career to the outdoors, you know, what would be the thing you'd want to do differently in the outdoor sector? Where is that big, I suppose, gap of actually we should be doing it this way, or this is a different way of doing it to how it's done now that might be beneficial to the people who are working in it and to the businesses that operate within it.
Um, I can't wait to hear your response to this too, because I would like you to answer this question from where you sit and what you see, and sort of, made a similar decision to sort of bring your passion and purpose and skills together around this space. But I think again, for me, there's just so much opportunity here, and folks and leaders are already doing a lot of this stuff. But I think again, we have to continuously be curious and sort of catch ourselves in different patterns and ways of thinking. But I think again, if you're a purpose, mission-driven brand, really living that is so important at the moment. Like in all of this uncertainty, folks are searching now for much more purposeful work. Like I guess I'm a case in point of that. So actually, like purpose-driven organisations can really become an employer of choice, and that can probably help overcome a lot of the usual challenges around engagement or retention. If you're really mission and purpose driven. And I think, as I mentioned, I think we all need to be more curious and less judgmental, and the outdoors industry can lead the way. So, when we think about linear CVs and we look at what that might look like, when we look at experience, like being really curious about moving industries and what that can be and what that can build. Because if someone is very purpose driven, like, and really wants to be there and do a great job, if we sort of exclude folks because they don't have a certain sector of industry experience, then we might be missing out on something really awesome. I think the same for sort of traditional qualifications too. Now, of course, for some roles in the industry, experience, health and safety, all of that stuff is absolutely critical. But for a lot of roles, you don't. Really, it's around attitude and skill set and all of that good stuff. So really questioning why you need what you need for roles within there. I think being thoughtful about, again, how you judge people's credibility or skill sets is really important. So I think what I've found is, that Instagram and brand are really interesting in this space. But it's very hard to do all of that stuff when you're doing your training, when you're trying to be a great guide on a trip. Like that stuff is a bit secondary sometimes. It's really hard to do all of that. So again, when you're looking for folks to work for you, going beyond, what that brand might look like, going beyond what that Instagram profile might look like, what that social media might look like, and working out how you can find out what's true about a person and what they're really good at, is really important within the interview process. I think normalizing career breaks and adventure, as we've talked about, and seeing the benefit that the skill set that takes and the benefit that can bring to your business, given how much energy people might return with. Offering flexibility too in working, right? Like hybrid working from anywhere. If you want to keep great people, so if you don't want your folks to go off and take sabbatical leave and do their adventures, offer sabbaticals. And then I could talk about this all day, so I'll hurry up. But rethinking leadership, look around your leadership team, like what does leadership truly look like in this organization? Is it pretty homogenous? Is it the same? Are we really leaning into what difference could be like? And then how does that manifest for your folks? If you've got a big team of employees, do they experience that day to day? Do they truly experience your values in action day to day? And I think, do your reflection, do the inclusion work. Are your products and services representative of the communities that you're looking to serve? How are you advancing access and belonging in the outdoors? There are so many opportunities to sponsor or partner with some of those community organizations that we talked about before. And I guess working with you too, like sharing roles, giving it access. I have to, put a plug to what that looks like. Things like pathways into the outdoors, when we think about the school system and we think about kind of that traditional school, not everyone thrives in that very one way environment. Actually, the outdoors could be such a great place to kind of think about what education looks like from start to finish, I think, if we were really, thoughtful about it. Too. And I don't think this is just about big companies. I'm also talking about like small travel companies. There's so many ways to lean into this in a different way, and to sort of have a bit of a strategy or an idea about how you can advance, access and belonging in the outdoors.
Absolutely. I think it's such interesting point, and I think really quite important learnings for a lot of businesses, as you say, at all scales. Particularly around those pieces of, CV breaks, as we talked about a couple of times here, and gaps within your CV, but also thinking around, who thrives where. Have people ever thought about, the hierarchy of their business? Do you need this many middle managers, in a structure? Are you paying attention to what your graduate entry people are saying to you about how the working environment actually is? And I've heard horror stories from people around how they feel they've been treated by organizations that present a very inclusive and a very big focus on those outdoor values that we've been espousing, but then when you come into it, and they're actually just a hard-nosed corporate organization that are trying to do whatever they can to do what they want and not really look after their staff. So I think there's a lot that can be done there, and I think there's a big piece when it comes back to that inclusion and accessibility that we're trying to face here at the Wild Path with, firstly the pay transparency. The amount of people who don't advertise what the salary is, and this is obviously not just within the outdoor sector. This is a much more
Yeah.
systemic problem across the jobs world and the recruitment world. But we make a big push now to say, actually, what is the salary, and why are you not sharing it? And we say that on all of our listings, that they're not listing the salary. Not just competitive doesn't mean anything, but not listed sort of sets the tone of, we're slightly avoiding it potentially. And there's various sectors that do, or sectors, various areas within the outdoors that do a lot better than others, where you're
Yeah.
consistently going to get the information around what pay and rations look like versus some others. And I think it's that working towards it and slightly pulling attention to it of,
Mhm.
you know, these ones are not saying it, these ones are, take from that what you will. Um, to sort of evoke and begin change, and people thinking about change of actually, no, we don't want that, we want to know. So I think that's a really big piece that really needs, a big overhaul in terms of people's comfort in sharing this information, which is at the end of the day why a lot of people do what they do, is because it's to pay the mortgage and pay the bills and go on these adventures. So I think that's particularly useful. But I think there's another big piece that, looking at so many job descriptions that we do, of how you frame a job description, the language that you use, particularly when it comes to looking for people from diverse backgrounds, or people with protected characteristics. Of I can't remember the study, or the exact numbers, but when you have sort of essential criteria on a job description, really you don't want more than three or four, maybe
Mhm.
five, a real push. And the language that you're using is so important, because what is it? It's, if a man generally sees the number of people who have, oh, I do three of the six of these, I'll apply. Where if a woman sees, they do nine of the 10 of those, they won't apply because they don't do that one. And so actually it's self-select, or it's selecting people out
Yeah.
unintentionally. This is not a goal, but how one frames your job description, how one talks about the organization, and the actual language. If you say, aggressive growth, you will turn people away, right?
Mm.
Not necessarily because it is actually aggressive growth, but just the word aggressive has a connotation. So I think the language organizations use, is really key, actually. And sort of stripping away a lot of that from the job descriptions to be much more open and equitable is possibly really, really key. And then I think, as you said, around that flexible working, job sharing, you know, do these jobs need to be done 9 to 5 in an office? Could
Yeah.
we do a compressed week? Could we do a rolling 9 day type setup? How is that being paid into a maternity, or with, new parents? And, could we, how could these actually work, as opposed to just, well, the norm is 9 to 5, and
Yeah.
therefore that's what we're going to do. Um, and I think that last piece, again, as you said, is the visibility, right?
Mhm.
And I think, again, why the Wild Path, I sort of started it in the first place, was all of these jobs, these amazing, fun, exciting jobs, are, in a WhatsApp group, or a Facebook page, or on an Instagram, and that, or maybe on and the company website, but that's it. So, for Joe Blogs, who's always wanted to work in it, but isn't in the outdoor sector already, it's a hard job to find these jobs, to find what's out there for you. So actually, providing visibility, and proactively advertising to a much wider audience, hopefully will make the sector more inclusive as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, almost sharing, like I've certainly shared the Wild Path with, folks that have got kids considering university and courses and stuff like now, of like, because there's such a diversity of different roles, like that around the outdoors, that can be full-time, part-time, they can be corporate roles within, outdoor brands. There's just so much to sort of think about, and how we bring that to the masses in a way where people can really think about what that looks like. Because again, as particularly now, like in this sort of like scarcity, scary place, like we naturally, it doesn't promote us to think we can do this, but actually I think something like this is really important to help folks think about the different ways that they can pursue a passion, pursue something that feels right, find a community, is really important. And it can be done. It's not necessarily easy, but it can be done. And that sort of starts, we say, like sort of backing yourself a little bit, and then more organizations and more access to things like the Wild Path, to see what that might look like. And then I think then that means others, the outdoor industry itself meeting that too, which is understand, like you say, providing more flexibility, being less judgmental, looking at different ways of roles. And I'd also say, like, if you're applying for something, and if it looks like it's full time, and it's all, you can ask, like, could this be full time? Could I do it this? Like, you can create that proactivity, I would always say too. So don't necessarily count yourself out. it might not necessarily pay off. It might take 8 or 9 times of asking, but ultimately it might. You never know in that space. And I think that that is so important at the moment to sort of stay positive. And I get a lot of positivity from being outside and in the outdoors. So it's like the self-fulfilling circle a little bit, in there. But it's also really exciting. And I say, as a community of folks so far, has been really wonderful to be part of.
Absolutely amazing, amazing, lovely. Well, Gemma, I think we're just about out of time there, but thank you so much for speaking today. It's been such a lovely conversation, and I think a lot of interesting learnings for those contemplating that big move into the outdoors, or that big career change, and then food for thought for hiring managers and people who are looking at their organizations as well. In terms of people want to get in touch with you, how best can they do that?
Yep, they can find me on all good social channels. Um, on, on Instagram at Miss Popejoy, on LinkedIn too. I'm sure we'll put your details around there. Yeah, lots of different ways.
Fantastic. And if you want to discover more about outdoor related careers and current opportunities, then I would highly suggest you subscribe to the Wild Path at teamwildpath.com. And thank you all so much for listening. And yeah, we'll see you next time.